Hey everyone, we are live about 25 hours from the NFL 22 draft in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm going to retweet this show out here as we get going. Excited to have another night of draft prep with my friend Doug Orth. You're also going to want to stay tuned on this RotoWire channel you're watching. You'll want to be on here tomorrow, an hour, make that 2 hours before the draft. We'll have some of our RotoWire team on here as well. And then the day after the draft, we're going to have some reactions from the draft. Really excited about that. And if you really want to not watch the networks, you want to follow the draft, I'm going to be on Instagram Live on the RotoWire page if anybody wants some analysis throughout the draft. If you're really desperate and bored, I'll be there for you. All right. So anyway, as we said here, we have Doug Orth here. Very excited. We're going to talk about wide receivers and tight ends. Doug and I are good friends. Been for a number of years, since 2018. He's the creator of the preseason matchup analysis and the big boards at FF Today. He won the Kings Classic title in 2020. In 20 plus years, he's yet to suffer a losing money season in high stakes fantasy football. Honestly, he's one of the most knowledgeable analysts you'll find. If you're not following Doug on Twitter, you should. He's at Doug Orth. Spelling can't be an issue there. No problems there. So we're in good shape. And we see Scott Cobes in the house. Scott, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you liked last night's show. Happy you're here again today. And preface of our show, just like NFL teams and scouts, Doug and I may have differences when we're sharing what we've observed and what we believe to be positives and negatives of players. But we hope that by giving you both of our views, you can add to your existing knowledge base while making your own player valuations. And Scott doesn't want to draft against Doug. I get it. All right, let's go over to 2022 class wide receivers. We're going to use Doug's order list, and we're going to start with Garrett Wilson. So, Doug, what do you see as upside qualities of Garrett Wilson?
One of the few guys in this draft class that can do damage to all three levels of the defense. I think he's well ahead of the curve when it comes to running routes, particularly when it comes to using leverage. He routinely gets into his defender's blind spot as quickly as possible, and he sells his routes really well on the short and intermediate stuff. He also has the speed to be a dynamic weapon in the vertical passing game and the change direction skills on quick hitters. I think he's almost a lock to catch the ball if he gets his hands on it down the field in contested catch situations. And I'd say perhaps the most surprising part of his toolbox is his ability to play above the rim for a shorter receiver. While he didn't get much of a chance to show it in last year, his ability to contort his body in midair is special. And then I would also add, further adding to his appeal is his awareness and body control when he ventures near the sideline or the back of the end zone. He's surprisingly good after the catch and after contact for a receiver of his size. And last but not least, he forced 19 missed tackles in last season.
Now, what I like is he played the X at Ohio State. And if you hear me talk, look, the cover two, the too high shell, it's going to be a staple in the NFL for the next 3 to 5 years. That is going to be a thing. And the ISO X receiver, which is the single receiver who will play opposite from the bunches, that receiver is going to be able to have chances to win. And I think Wilson profiles well there. Doug and I will have some overlap, but I'll quickly go over my positives. His footwork is elite, and he gets his separation almost instantly. And he gets into those routes, very quick feet, and his hips are very fluid, can turn extremely well. He also will change his speeds to set up defenders, very masterful, and the double moves. He can embarrass defenders. And like Doug said, that leaping ability in traffic, just outstanding. And you also mentioned the deep speed. When he's in pursuit, has people in pursuit of him, he can get by defenders. So with Doug, I think this is a phenomenal athlete. But what are some downside traits you may have seen of Garrett Wilson?
I think most of his concerns about his pro readiness are things that he has minimal control over. He's 6'1", 183. So receivers can get by on that size, but it'd be a slight area of concern. While he does play physically, he's far from powerful and needs more functional strength. To that end, while adding 5 to 10 pounds over the next year or two is entirely doable, there's a possibility it could take away from his speed, and that's certainly the last thing that you want with him. His hands in the short passing game and along the sideline will betray him from time to time, suggesting he may not be all that comfortable living over the middle of the field, or maybe focusing too much on his body position when he's near the sideline. The interesting part about the former possibility is that he's actually really good after the catch and after contact, so maybe his inconsistent hands have more to do about him rushing the process than anything else. And despite the earlier praise I had about his route running, he could certainly add some polish to his game, which I had occasional issues with his footwork, not many, but they tend to lead to him rounding off his routes and taking too many steps to make his move.
The only thing that I saw downside-wise is the middle of the field was a little bit of a concern for me. So if he's on a team where he can stay on the boundary, I think that works to his advantage, but I do think there could be struggles, and the crossers could be some problems. But overall, to me, I agree, number one receiver on the board. His explosiveness testing came out 58th percentile, so his getting off the line at the NFL level, if that testing translates into his play at the NFL, it may be explosives that beat college athletes. So we have to see early on what that looks like. I don't think that's a big knock. It's still well above average. So I think that's very good. And he wasn't an early breakout candidate. He's 59th percentile breakout age. So it wasn't like he broke out immediately. But nonetheless, I don't see too many flaws here. And I don't see why people wouldn't make him the number one receiver on the board. Any final thoughts on Garrett Wilson as you wrap him up?
Well, I don't know if you were going to talk about props with him, or if you were going to talk about props about. I could
receivers very well.
I was going to say I could easily see him going top 10. I've seen a lot of Atlanta at number 8 easily. I could easily see that, just to give the listeners an idea of where I think he is prospect wise.
And your comps you gave Stephon Diggs as the high end. You gave Russell Gage as the low end. Love the Stephon Diggs comp. I do think that profiles very well, because a lot of the ways that we see him playing matches up very well with what Diggs did. I like that. Other than that, any final thoughts before we move off, Garrett Wilson?
Sure. As I kind of alluded to earlier, his route running is sharper than most, and his route tree is quite varied. Combination of speed, shiftiness, and body control bode well for his future. Kind of as I think you've alluded to, I question his ability to deal with some of the league's more physical cornerbacks. I'm not sure I see a future featured X receiver, but I do see a potentially very good Z or slot, which works well for him because it gets him off the line of scrimmage, gives him a clean release, more clean release more often, I should say. The inability to play full-time at split end, which is the X, what we were talking about earlier, is not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination, but the bulk of teams looking for receivers usually look for that X receiver, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. I think he has a high floor, but a potentially moderate ceiling, at least until he can prove he can handle the physical coverage that we spoke about earlier.
If he's going to be drafted as high as we might think, he's probably going to be drafted in the hopes of being an X, because if you're going to have a Z, I don't think you want to spend that high of a pick on him, but maybe I'm wrong. But I do agree. Like I said, I'm not going to have too many qualms with Garrett Wilson. I'm going to move off him now. I think we can go to the next player, which you have Jamison Williams listed as your number 2. So as we get into traits.
Oh, sorry, you froze there for a second. All right.
Uh-oh.
No.
So Jamison Williams, high-end traits.
Yes, speed, acceleration, and separation. Probably the best in the class on all 3. He led FBS in 50-yard, 60-yard, and 70-yard catches last year. Just in case people want to know, 9 50-yard catches, 6 60-yard catches, and 4 70-yard catches. He destroys, I have here, he destroys pursuit angles. He is more than fast, however. He is quick, especially for a player who is 6'2", for a 6'2" receiver. And he understands, for a speedster, he does a great job of understanding how to tempo his routes. So consistently threatens cornerbacks with his speed, as kind of mentioned already. He appears to understand what defenders and defenses are trying to do to him, and he makes them do what he wants them to do. He also understands how to sit down against zone coverage. Again, something I mentioned in the draft profiles at FF Day. That's a quality that usually eludes many vertical wideouts. And although he was charged with 6 drops last year, his hands rarely seem to betray him on the downfield throws. He's usually pretty money on when he's tracking the ball and whatnot. I said Alabama smartly used him as a Z in the slot to get him away from the physical coverage, and I think that's going to be his ideal spot, or the ideal way he should be used in the pros a little.
Yeah, he'll have to be, because we'll talk about his size. I'm going to talk about more in the downside traits. But so yeah, top end speed. He ran a 99th percentile 40-yard dash. Phenomenal time. We know that. What I like also is he's very good at changing speeds at any point of his route. That allows him to create maximum separation. It keeps defenders on their heels because they're not quite sure what they're going to get. So I think he's very high level with that. He's also, when he's pressed, he's creative. He doesn't have like a single go-to move. He can get separation in a number of ways, and that really impressed me. And while he's cutting, I noticed a suddenness about him, and I was very happy with that, because usually these fast players, they don't always have that repertoire. So he has those items. And then obviously, if he gets a seam, he's gone. Game-breaking speed. Doug, what downside traits do you see from Jamison Williams?
As everybody listening is going to already know, will he be able to, or is already thinking about Jamison Williams, will he be ready to play in September after tearing his ACL in the national title game? Beyond that, I am going to ask a question here. How is it possible that he wasn't able to crack the receiver rotation at Ohio State before transferring to Alabama? Now, I list the Ohio State receivers here. Let's be clear. We're talking about 3 guys that are going to go in the first round this year, next year: Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olavey, and Garrett Wilson. But with that said, future first-round picks, especially like the one we're talking about here with Jamison Williams, it doesn't matter who the competition is in front of you. You're going to force your way on the field, and that did not happen. He had 15 career receptions before transferring this year. So are we going to assume, or are we going to pretend like that didn't happen? Regarding his actual game and or physical limitations, he's another one of the many guys we'll talk about could add 15 pounds to his frame. In his case, he would still be undersized if he did that. Yes. Not nearly strong enough to handle physical coverage right now. I made a last second change in his comp, but I think he has a lot of a young Deshaun Jackson in his game, both positive and negative.
Yep.
And that includes being loose with the ball and catching too often with his body.
Yes.
He's not afraid to run across the middle, but he can be timid at times when he senses traffic or finds himself in contested catch situations. Last but not least, I think the most glaring weakness, and this is both a blessing and a curse, is his blocking. I think I mentioned this with one guy yesterday. He has a indifferent attitude blocking. In his defense, Bill O'Brien, the offense coordinator, the new 2021 first-year coordinator for the Crimson Tide, spoke highly of his competitiveness, and Williams does cover punts as a gunner fairly often, which kind of speaks well to his team attitude, which I knock him for later. But anyway.
A couple things I'll add on the downsides. You mentioned the size. Being 6'2" and only 179, it's a BMI issue. I'm a little concerned with it. I would like it almost better if he was shorter at 179. That BMI is a problem. He is going to get hit during his routes. And I already saw that when he was contacted during routes, there were issues at times with that. Now he's going to the big leagues where there's going to be a lot harder hitting in that short area. So I'm concerned about that. And when I said earlier, his game-breaking speed, when he gets a crease, is there. But if he doesn't have an immediate crease, he isn't really getting anywhere consistently. And so there's a little bit of a concern there. That could make him a really boom or bust player. So that's my concern there. Final words on one Jamison Williams.
Jim, you just said it with the last thing that you said there. I have very much boom or bust fear with him, just as a prospect in general, but in a game by game sense too. Good news, bad news with Williams. With what we've already said, he's going to stretch defenses from the moment he steps on the field. We've already talked about his speed. He possesses the ability to make sharp cuts, and he can change the game with one touch. Teams search high and low for players who can force defensive coordinators to lose sleep at night. It's going to be a tall order for him to be an X receiver, though. I think it is slightly concerning. Yeah, I think it is at least slightly concerning that most of his pre-injury qualities concerns were. Let me start over there.
Sorry.
I think it is at least slightly concerning that most of his pre-injury qualities associated with effort and teamwork were his biggest issues. I think I saw inconsistency working back to underthrown balls. He hears the footsteps when he works inside the hashes. He's not strong enough to beat physical coverage. And as I alluded to with the blocking, he hasn't really shown much indication that he wants to get his hands dirty on non-passing downs.
My final word is this. Look, people are going to get sick of me saying it all preseason, but the too high shell is a thing. And the purpose of the too high shell is very simple. It is to limit explosive plays. Jamison Williams is all about the explosive ways. There are going to be safeties over the top. That is where his game. He's a stretch Z. He wants the deep play. That is not going to be there. We saw what it did to Tyreek Hill last year. He became an underneath expert is what he had to be. And Tyreek Hill is a thick dude. So he's powerful for his size. Jamison Williams, that scares me. So, yes, boomer bust. I have him as my wide receiver 5. I know you have him as your wide receiver 2. I'm just very nervous about this current state of the NFL and how he fits in. I know you gave final words. Is there anything else you missed?
Just, I would say, while he is my receiver 2, I'm definitely projecting him at his ceiling, I believe, because I had him lower. I certainly graded his tape lower than I have him as ranked, if that makes any sense.
Totally does. Now we take a minute to give a couple shout outs. Abby Kelly's back in the house. Glad you're here. Say you're biggest fan. That is much appreciated. Checking in for round 2. We know you're here yesterday. We have Zen Carl H saying hello to us. Thank you also for being here. Glad everybody who's here is in the house. If anybody else is high, we'll be sure to shout you out as well. Doug, next we have Treylon Burks. He is our third receiver that we'll cover in here out of Arkansas, 6'2", 225. What are some positives that you see from Treylon Burks?
Well, he has Jim Coventry size, 6'2", 225.
Not exactly.
Not exactly. Okay. Well, he is that size though. Unsurprisingly, he's a headache for defenses after the catch. 9.2 yards after the catch per reception is among the best in the draft class, which only speaks to how difficult he can be to bring down and how much he seems to enjoy creating contact. And he's one of the few guys in this class that seems to really enjoy creating contact. I'd say perhaps the best part of his game is that he is more than just a big receiver who wins with physicality. He's also a big play receiver who can beat defenses vertically. Yes. In short, he boasts, or I consider he boasts, unusual athleticism for a receiver his size. I believe this shows up repeatedly on the rare occasion that a cornerback attempts to press him at the line. Something that only happened 39 times, by the way, according to Pro Football Focus. Let me enunciate there. Arkansas was not shy about moving him across the formation either. So while he was used primarily out of the slot, 82.9% last year, I believe, he logged time on the outside in the backfield and occasionally as an H-back. And as a result of this usage, it's reasonable to assume he has a pretty high football IQ, even if the Razorbacks really didn't use him, or he didn't run a full route tree.
And what I'm going to say, and again, we'll have overlap, which is fine. I love his play speed. At 6'2", 225, his time speed is only 48th percentile, but for his size, that's 87th percentile speed. So he's very fast for his size. And you mentioned he's very physical, both at the line and after the catch. With his size, he uses it properly. I also like when he'll have an off-frame pass in traffic, he makes mid-air adjustments, and we love that, especially with the way defense are focusing to take out the passing game. And in the times he'll need to phase zones, he finds the soft spots very well, and he does it at times when the play will break down a bit. So he'll be a very good friend to quarterbacks. So I love that about him. Very dominant in college. Had a great target percentage share, 93rd percentile. So just outstanding there. Doug, we got to say Susan Gendro, you're here as well. Appreciate you being here. Hope you're enjoying the show, and we will get some downside points on one Treylon Burks.
All right, buckle up. Evaluators are going to have a little choice but to guess on a wide receiver prospect's running skills based on how the college game is played now, Burks showed aptitude to be solid in this area, but he ran an inordinate number of bubble screens and go routes with an occasional slant and scrambled drill to catch mixed in. PFF said he was 37th in college football with 18 catches on screen passes for 219 yards and 25th in deep catches with 12. Making his evaluation more difficult is that NFL teams would rather not be forced to put a player with X receiver size, as we talked about earlier, in the slot, and there's a distinct possibility he ends up being a big slot.
Yes.
Now, why was he in the slot so much? The OC there was Kendall Briles. For the Arkansas OC is Kendall Briles. Did he line him up so much because he wanted to guarantee Burks easy touches, or was it because he didn't have the route running nuance to work on the outside? Between the lack of physical coverage that we talked about, like I said, the 39 snaps against press coverage, because of the lack of physical coverage he saw in college and how often he lined up inside, he's more of a projection outside than the typical prospect would be. And last but not least, he possesses the size to be a very good blocker, but his effort as a blocker was relatively inconsistent.
Yes, before I get into my downsides, we have another comment from Zin Carla H. And yes, I can understand learning football from Doug. Great person to learn from. Definitely, I'll have some great, phenomenal conversations about football with Doug, and I do consider him one of the best in the biz. So you found the right person to talk football with for sure. All right, my downsides on Treylon Burks. Yeah, with Doug, I don't think his routes are very crisp. And that's probably why he looks more like a power slot than an X that his size would dictate. And it does take him a few strides to get to full speed. It's build-up speed. He's not very explosive. That leads to his athletic measurables from the combine. 30th percentile explosiveness, 9th percentile agility. Those are troubling numbers. Now, 9th percentile agility would make a slot job terrible, but his size is the great equalizer there. If you're that big in the slot, the agility isn't as important because of the wingspan and the ability to overpower defenders. So that would work out. Also, I don't think he transitions very well into his sharper cuts, and he loses some speed as he transitions. And so the separation that sometimes gets early in the route, he diminishes that when he adds on to the move in the route. So like one last thing, and Doug mentioned he was used to his absolute strengths in college, and in the NFL, it may not work the same way because that size advantage he had in college isn't going to be as pronounced at the NFL level. Doug, final words on one Treylon Burks.
I've seen and heard comparisons to Cordell Patterson and Deebo Samuel this year. I don't think that's what he is, and I don't think I would want to use him. I know he's had some backfield snaps. I don't think that's what he is. While he's certainly has the size to handle a carrier too, it's hard to imagine him being a true Swiss Army knife. I believe you said that creating separation could be an issue. You look at some of his performances in the high-profile games against Alabama, 179-2. Texas A&M was 6-1, 67-1. Provide hope that he can be my high-end comp, A.J. Brown. But then he had duds against Texas, Georgia, and LSU. So, which one is he? He's going to be a favorite of many, and I mean fantasy fans as well as real fans because of his size and athleticism. But I got to believe right now he profiles much more as a high upside complementary receiver that may end up being a long-term slot. He does have alpha wideout traits, and he could grow into that role eventually in his career if he has a strong position coach. And we're probably going to talk about fit several times throughout the episode here. If he has a strong position coach who tires him on the importance, who drills him tirelessly on the importance of route running, he could be an alpha. Poor position coach may end up beginning his career like Laviska Shenault does.
Doug, I think we come back after the draft and they have landing spots and probably talk about it that way. I think that might be a good way to handle that, because once we know where they're at, instead of speculating, we can do the real deal. I think that although you mentioned the high-end comp is a poor man's A.J. Brown, we have to mention your low-end comp. A more versatile than N'Keal Harry. Well, I think I'm more versatile than N'Keal Harry. And that's saying something. Anyway, I just had to add that. So that range of outcomes is very big, and that's important to understand. So again, Burks is a very good prospect, but there are a lot of things that could go wrong. Now, Abby Kelly has a question. Do we think the draft this year, because the pandemic, will be chaotic? A general question. So in terms of the actual event, I don't think you mean that. I think the event runs flawlessly, but I think you may mean in terms of how the draft shakes out. Remember, this is a unique draft because so many players didn't go into the draft last year. This draft class is almost 50% bigger than a normal draft class we would have. And the first round talent may not be through the roof, but you are going to get starting solid players through round 4. There will be misses, of course, but I think because of the pandemic, this is the deepest draft we'll ever have seen. Doug, thoughts?
Agree. It's been well publicized and well documented that there's not a lot of blue chip players in this draft, but I think the middle class of this draft, if you will, is going to be as deep as it's ever been. So we might be looking at, and I don't mean just quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends. I'm talking about the entire draft as a whole. We may be looking at no more than 8 or 10 blue chip prospects, if even that. But you're going to find decent starting receivers down the road anyway, probably in the 4th and 5th round. So as far as, I don't think it's going to be the pandemic other than pushing the players back. So it's contributed to the deep class, but I don't think anything, just like you said, I don't think it's going to, the pandemic is going to affect the actual proceedings. Does that
Correct.
make sense?
Yes. Now, okay. Scott says, do players 35 to 65 have as much talent as the projected first rounders? It could be 20 to 70. Literally, it could be 20 to 70, and there's going to be hit and misses all over the draft. But in terms of the talent pool, I don't see a big difference between 20 and 70. Doug, is that crazy?
Completely agree.
Okay, so we're on the right page there, I think. So we'll go next to Jahan Dotson. Now, Jahan Dotson, coming out of Penn State, 5'11", 178. Doug, what are some upside traits that you see from Jahan Dotson?
Think he might have the best hands of any prospect in this draft, or certainly the ones I watched. Only 2 drops on 138 targets last year. Silky smooth as a route runner, regularly changes up his release and the tempo of his route to keep his defender off balance. Very little wasted motion in his footwork. Sells his routes with multiple head and body fakes if and when it necessary to keep his man honest. For a smaller receiver, 5'11", 184. Very adept in contested catches situations, and he has a surprisingly large catch radius. Does that in part because he times his jump so well on inaccurate high throws, which there were plenty in Penn State this year, and he finds a second gear to create late separation. His speed and quickness makes him a nightmare in space, which accounts for the run after catch grade that I gave him. Again, I'll mention my profiles on FF today. He has some value on special teams. He was Penn State's primary punt returner in 2020 and 2021. 14.3 yards per return and 1 touchdown on the 22 punts that he fielded.
Now, I see that, again, we always overlap. I'm going to keep repeating that. He uses varied moves. He's not using the same move to get off the line, and I think that's going to benefit him at the NFL level. And he is quick off the line, especially when he has man coverage. So he is, despite his size, able to get free from man, and that's going to be important at the NFL level. And he attacks the ball so well in the air, different types of throws. Again, it's just not one move he goes to. He's versatile. I think personally, he seems to work better when he has space on the outside. He navigates that, in my opinion, that space better than he does the middle of the field. Not that he won't be effective there, but I think the outside is where he does his best work. Outside of that, let's move to some downside traits, Doug, that you see from Jahan Dotson.
I referenced it earlier. He's one of those many prospects in this class. It's in the low to mid 180-pound range with questionable strength. That I think that strength shows up in 2 key areas: the lack of forced missed tackles and creating yards after the catch on shorter passes. To that end, he only had 5.3 yards after the catch. Average, obviously, and only forced 9 missed tackles, both of which obviously rank on the low end of the class. He usually gets quick release, a clean release, like you said, but he has to do a better job of winning the hand fighting battle.
Yes.
And it seems like his focus sometimes is solely on coming out of the blocks as opposed to anything else. Very savvy route runner, like we said, but there were multiple times where he allowed a defender to break on the ball when his cut wasn't as crisp as it should have been. And you do see the willingness to block, but again, this is where we talk about the functional strength again. That sometimes if a truck is coming at you, you're not going to be able to stop it if you're a mid-sized car. So.
Oh, nice. Yes, good analogy there. And so again, it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself here. I'm not. I mentioned earlier that quickness and varied moves off the line can help him against man. But when the bigger, stronger corners press him, he is going to have some struggles against that. The size is a bit of an issue, and he can also get rerouted from a stronger corner, and he's going to see a share of those in the NFL. Not always, but he will see a share. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. Also, from a testing perspective, he ran a good 40 time, but for his size adjusted, it only came out 36th percentile. The 40 time was 85th percentile, but for his size, he needs to be faster. So if that time speed is the way he plays out, that could be a little bit of a problem. Also, his explosiveness testing in the combine, 53rd percentile, so pretty much average there. So those do concern me a bit. I do like those testing scores. I do believe the NFL uses and continues to use those for a reason. They measure some very important traits. They don't always translate, but they're important to at least be cognizant of. Final words on Jahan Dotson.
The ability to create space and change directions effortlessly tends to carry over from the college to the program, and I believe those are definitely two areas where Dotson excels. Again, talking about the strengths, he needs to add some, obviously, but it's rare to find a receiver with his level of intelligence, quickness, and ability to high point the ball. His drawbacks, for the most part, I think, are fixable. So I believe it'd be something of a surprise if he's not the team's primary slot right away. Much like Emmanuel Sanders, who was my low-end comp, or even Tyler Lockett, he probably would fit in best as a team's complementary option for the first year or two of his career. My high-end comp for him is Deontay Johnson, and it wouldn't surprise me if his career begins in a similar way to Johnson's. I'm not going to say he's not going to be a 100-catch wide up by the third year, but I don't think he'll struggle to be a high-volume option. And I added here at the end, while players such as Garrett Wilson or Jamison Williams will probably generate more buzz, I could easily see him having more success than both and being the best wideout of that bunch.
Again, I'm going to repeat myself. If you're sick of it, I'm sorry, but I keep talking about the too high looks right again. That gives two types of receivers in today's NFL an advantage. The strong X receiver that can win the ISO on the sideline with one defender, but the other one is a slot. And we saw as last season, when just some example, Amon-Ra St. Brown, once he loaded in as the primary slot, and they were figuring out that they were dealing with the two high safeties. We saw the numbers he and a lot of slot receivers put up. It's what the defense is going to give you. Therefore, Jahan Dotson coming in as we're fully expecting a slot player, and with his skill set, if he can get anywhere close to the high end of his ability, he can put up big numbers as early as year one, because the slots are going to continue to thrive seriously the next 3 to 5 years. Anything else on that, Doug?
You said it well. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. We will continue on. We're going to go to Drake London next out of USC. Big dude, 6'4". What are some positive traits, Doug, you see from Drake London?
He knows what his big strengths are, and he takes advantage of them regularly. He's a former prodigious high school basketball player, 6'4", as I believe you said already. He maximizes that frame in contested catch situations. He led FBS with 19 such receptions. He's more than just a 50-50, a tall 50-50 downfield guy too, though. USC used him regularly on screens because he can shake defenders in space, and he seems to embrace contact when the situation calls for it. He ranked to the end about working in space and the screens and whatnot. He ranked inside the top 15 receivers in college football last year in screen catches and screen yards. Shows that aforementioned basketball background with excellent body control on sideline throws, and he understands how to cut off a defender's angle to the ball. kind of like, not quite like boxing out, but kind of like boxing out for a rebound while the ball's still in the air. Three other traits that I believe he has that was going to definitely endear him to a coaching staff: his willingness to block, the awareness he shows when his quarterback's in trouble, and his versatility. Could end up being a very high-end slot and a high-end perimeter receiver. Last but not least, I believe he's the youngest right receiver prospect in this class, and he's not going to turn 21 until training camp. So there's more than enough room for growth.
Yeah, and his breakout age is 99th percentile. He was a young breakout, and that tells us so much, because when you're the breaking into college against juniors, some seniors, and you're dominating there, that plays out well when you develop and you're in the NFL. Now, you mentioned the basketball skills. He uses that body so effectively. That is the key, not just the skills, but knowing how to do that. And his routes are smooth. I'm impressed with his route running overall. And at the catch point, he can have that body control, athleticism, and strength, hand strength. So he can win those contested catches that are so important. And even when the ball is off his body frame, he's very good in those. And the one thing I really like, some receivers are smart at getting their hands put up late so they don't tip the defender off, and he does that well. So I'm very impressed with that.
I've heard that called late hands, and yeah,
it is. Yep. Late hands, exactly. So those are my positives on Drake London. What do you see as some downside traits for Drake London?
I've seen more discussion about his lack of separation versus he separates well than I think of any other player I've in this class, but I see it as a problem. So two things that stood out to me: drops and lack of separation. He had 8 drops on 96 catchable targets, which is a pretty high startling number for a player who does such a good job in contested catch situations. I believe the lack of separation is a multi-layered problem. At 6'4", while he does run good routes, his 6'4" frame makes it hard to sink his hips.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the bigger problem is, though, I can't tell you how many times when I was watching his tape that the corner didn't feel – the corner basically stood. I mean, his feet weren't moving because he wasn't threatened by London running by him. At least that's what I attributed it to. While I believe that London can overcome some of that by outmuscling cornerbacks downfield, he may have a problem turning big plays into touchdown unless those targets are happening in the end zone. I think he also separates on the short stuff, forcing him to be as reliant on his size on a slant pattern as he is on a go route. The ankle injury that happened in late October, for those who may not remember or didn't know, he waited until April 15th to have his pro day, but still didn't run. And I believe he did that in large part because I think he knows he's not going to time well.
Yes. And then he only ran one of the explosiveness drills and one of the agility drills, and 22nd percentile in the explosiveness, 12th percentile in the agility. Oh. He should not have tested at all. Did not do himself any favors there. And I mentioned earlier, he is a smooth route runner, but that doesn't mean he's a great route runner. First of all, when he's initially starting his route, not very precise with his footwork, and that's going to be problematic against NFL corners. Also, when he has sharp cuts, not good coming out of the sharp cuts. Like you said, hard for him to sink his hips at that size. There's a little bit of a problem there. And look, he's not going to outrun the defense. You mentioned didn't test for running. We kind of know why he didn't. So there are some great positives. There are some negatives as well. Possibly he overcomes them. What's your final word on one Drake London?
We've been doing this with some of the prospects here earlier. My high end for him is Cortland Sutton with a hint of Michael Thomas, which is I think is going to lead into what I'm going to say with my wrap of him. My low end is Alan Lazard, just again to give people an idea of what his window or what his. I think that's a pretty big drop off from those two. Anyway, so what do I think of him overall? I've seen some comparison to Mike Evans. I don't agree.
No.
London is not as big. Evans was 230, or I believe he still is around 230. Does not appear near as fast. Evans ran a 4.53 at his 2014 combine. I'd be surprised if London runs anywhere close to low 4.6s. I think he's probably in the low 4.6s. And he doesn't have the same ability to separate down the field. The same can theoretically be said about Michael Thomas, but I believe the difference in Thomas is much more refined as a route runner.
Yes.
Can London get where Thomas is someday? Possibly. I believe London profiles more as a dominant contested catch wideout who may be his team's primary threat in the red zone, which is why I made the comp to Cortland Sutton. The profile I just gave you is not one that's typically that doesn't typically lend itself to a player who's going to be eventually become his team's alpha, and more of like a Kenny Golladay type as opposed to that relies on touchdown efficiency.
You know, when I do my comp, I think a little bit of Mike Williams. Do you see any of that? Not so much.
Chargers Mike Williams.
Yeah.
I don't see the same athleticism, obviously, but I see where you're getting the comp from. Yes.
Yeah, I can see them both being used as that big stretch Z, get down the field. Anyway, a long debate on the Chargers. They should use him a little differently, but they did for a while, and it was working. But another story for another day. It
was working for my fantasy team for a while too.
It was, and then they went back to it a little bit late in the season. So I hope this season, if the coaching staff realizes when they look back at the season, now we're talking about Mike Williams with the Chargers, if they realize what successes he had, and they went away from him for about 8 games, and maybe even 10 games, no, 8 games in the middle of the season, if they use him as they did early and late in the season, Mike Williams could be one heck of a fantasy star for you this year. Now, we had a question. Scott Cobe asked if we see a DK Metcalf type with London. The problem there is DK is like 99th percentile speed. The dude is like as fast as they come for his size, and he is literally going to beat the snot out of anybody who gets in his way. He is in some ways a unicorn that way. What are your thoughts on that question, Doug?
It's one of the reasons I made the high-end comp to Cortland Sutton. I believe, I don't see Metcalf at all. Just for the reasons you said, he's not that athletic. He's not that bursty. He's not that fast. A Cortland Sutton, I believe, big play, big ball type of guy. So, but anyway, I don't see Metcalf at all.
Yeah, and you mentioned the burst. It's so important with DK Metcalf because he's literally, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he's over 90th percentile burst. Insane. So, but good question, but we don't see that one there. George Pickens is next. I think I have him significantly higher, but he has a lot of question marks, so I could see him being very polarizing here. Coming out of Georgia at 6'3", I have him listed at 195. Doug, what are some high-end traits you see out of George Pickens?
For a guy that played 24 games, I think there's already a few areas in his game that are NFL ready. I believe he plays to his time speed, and he projects to be a very good field stretcher because he tracks the ball well. High level of athleticism and consistently gives exceptional effort to bring in the deep ball. I believe that same effort carries over to his blocking, and he doesn't mind getting physical with his man, even if he could use some technique work in that regard. Routinely wins at the catch point and in 50-50 situations, using his length and strong hands to make the play, even if he can't quite shake his defender beforehand. And 6'3", 195, I believe was his size. I don't have it in front of me here, but I think it's 6'3", 195.
Correct. That's what I have.
It's also rare for a college receiver with his dimensions to consistently get off the line of scrimmage as well as he does. And I also believe he has a great feel for when to set in a soft spot against zone coverage.
I won't go crazier because we're going to be a little bit on time here. I wanted to get through at least one more receiver. I think at the top of his routes, he doesn't lose separation there. He's very sudden with his moves as well, and he can run past defenders. He can box them out, so he's versatile. Acrobatic catches. If the passes are off his body, he can go and get them. He can win when defenders are on them. And that is what the NFL, again, talk about the 2 high safeties, the X receiver is going to have to win against a single defender. And George Pickens has the athletic profile that he definitely can do that. Doug, what are some downside traits of George Pickens?
He consistently, in the games I viewed, he consistently struggles to separate and finds himself in contested catch situations when he doesn't need to be there. Yes. Let's just say that he's inconsistent because there were several times where he was exceptional in not being very good at that. So too many times he didn't stack his defender. In case people don't know what I mean by that, it's basically getting in front of the cornerback and then not giving him an alley to play the ball deep. He doesn't stack his defender, or I don't think he stacks his defender well enough. And he allowed the defender to get in his body at the catch point. Needs to add muscle. Again, I'm sorry, just as much as you get tired of repeating some of the things that you're saying, I'm repeating that too. He disappoints me after the catch more often than not because he doesn't have the kind of strength necessary to drive through the tackle attempt. I don't see anything more than a perimeter receiver just because he doesn't have the quickness enough to be in the slot. And I think it's also worth noting, and you'll like this if you haven't heard about it. I'm sure you have. He was suspended for violating team rules and kicked out of the game for fighting in 2019. Yes. Then there was that tweet a couple of days ago. I don't know if you read it. This is what I was referring to. Multiple scouts and coaches have made it known publicly they don't want to work with him. One scout even went so far to say that he thinks Pickens has been enabled his whole life, and will not draft him.
You know, with receivers, I almost like when some scouts and coaches say that. I think of Randy Moss, I think of Terrell Owens. I'm not saying Pickens is them, but you see a lot of these guys that have, we'll say people perceive them to have issues. Sometimes that's the receiver I want. I want the guy that's got a chip on his shoulder, got some attitude, come in the NFL and just say, you know what, I'm going to take over here. Pickens has traits that can do that. I'm not going to add more because of time to what you said about his downside. I do, though, think he broke out as a freshman, 727 yards and 8 touchdowns in 12 games. He did have injuries a little bit, but in the last 2 years, basically, when he was on the field, his numbers did not play to his talent. He was not putting up the numbers that I think he should have for the player he can be as the X in the Georgia system. And I also think they ran him a lot of verticals and a lot of curls. So I don't really know how vast his route tree is.
Yeah.
And that could be a work in progress that it may not get there.
Yep, agreed. And breaking news, Jim likes his receivers with issues. Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. And except for A.J. Brown, man, that dude is a class act.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. When you hear him speak, that is a good man. All right. So any final words on George Pickens?
I'll wrap him up real quickly. I got a lot more to say on Pickens, but I can wrap him up real quickly.
Okay.
He needs to develop. He needs time to develop first and foremost. And as I said earlier about another receiver, a very good receivers coach could help him enjoy the kind of career I comped him to Devontae Parker. I believe a very good receivers coach could get that out of him. If his 2020 film is any indication, if he lands on a team with an average or worse position coach, he could be an afterthought very quickly.
Yes. Boom or bust again, another player like that. I am on the boom side. I do think that he's a player that's going to translate well to the NFL. He's going to grow into his role. But again, downside as well. But again, I'm favorable for him. You know what? Do you think anybody would be disappointed if we do more receivers and don't go to tight end?
Not a problem because
I don't think so.
I would say maybe Trey McBride.
All right, we'll say McBride till 5 of the hour, and then we'll cover him. And then after the draft, we'll make sure we come back on landing spots and go there. So we're going to try. Our goal is to cover 3 receivers in about 8 minutes. Sky Moore. You have him as up near the high end of your wide receivers, rightfully so. What are some high-end traits you see of Sky Moore?
He might be on the short end in terms of height, but he's not small, nor does he play that way. FBS, 26 missed tackles forced last year. That's even more what he does, and what we're going to talk about here in a bit is more impressive because he didn't start playing receiver until he arrived at Western Michigan. So he's got 3 years of being a receiver. He's exceptional at leveraging his routes and efficient with his footwork. He's not a field stretcher and probably won't be that, but he does have a good second gear. Perhaps part of his sure-handedness is the fact that he's got 10 and a quarter inch hands, which are among the biggest, if not the biggest, in the draft class for receivers. And that's right there.
Yeah, yep. And quickly, I'm going to say he finds the soft spots in the zone. I think that's going to be very good for his role in the NFL. His vision helps him to find space after the catch. Vision is excellent. And he also has some tackle breaking ability. His lower body strength is solid. I'm very impressed with that. And he improved each year in college. His last year, he averaged 107 yards and a touchdown on 11 targets. Outstanding. Downsides on Sky Moore.
Receivers typically need some combination of either height, incredible athleticism, vertical jump in this case, or elite speed to win downfield consistently in the NFL. I don't believe he has any of those attributes working in his favor. He also doesn't consistently stack his defender, which makes it a little bit harder for him downfield. He'll need to continue getting better at creating separation in order to maximize his run after catch opportunities. And prospects with his size usually have significant special teams experience, either returning kicks or whatnot. He doesn't have any. He almost has none. Yes. He also has some durability issues. 2 ankle injuries in high school, and then he missed parts of 2 games last year.
And I'm only going to add a couple of things here. His measurable testing, 50th in explosiveness, 25th percentile agility. That gets me nervous. The agility thing, if that ends up translating in the NFL, that'll be problematic because he's going to need to win in the slot. So he's going to hopefully that testing was an anomaly for him. We know he can find the soft spots in his zone, but I am a little bit nervous about that. What's your final word on Sky Moore?
Well, it's easy to see some shades of good old Steve Smith in his game on occasion. My high-end comp of Golden Tate makes a lot more sense as a player who he could look to emulate. We talked about the downfield receiver traits that he doesn't have. I believe he was still very good after the catch, and just like Golden Tate was very good after the catch year after year in the short and intermediate passing game. I see Sky Moore's career taking a similar path.
Yeah, the Golden Tate cop, I think, is perfect for him from everything. I mean, even like the lower body strength, which Golden Tate, I believe, had as well. So I do think that's solid. He doesn't have to make it as a slot receiver. And again, in this version of the NFL, he's going to get a chance quickly. That agility is just going to have to be there because that's going to be very critical for him. But 5'10", 195 is good size for a slot receiver, so that works out well for him. Let's get into David Bell's profile a bit here. Coming out of Purdue, what are some high-end traits on David Bell?
There's something to be said about a player who produces every week, even though he's the focal point of the defensive game plan. And he's big. He's the rare big receiver in this draft, 212 pounds, wins with excellent body control and exceptional route running ability. He plays physical. He does a very good job of getting a clean inside release. Teams, it was amazing to me when I was watching him how often he used the same move to get inside, and it worked every time. He does a good job with tempo, selling his fakes well, and while he's far from a speedster, which we can probably get into in a second, he's got decent build-up speed and is strong enough to pick up some yards after the contact. He forced 25 missed tackles last year, which was third in college football.
Yeah, so like you have strong yardage after the catch. I really like that. He tracks the deep ball very well, and he attacks the ball when it's up in the air. And so that is very beneficial in making sure, he takes the pass away from the cornerback, makes the play. So I think those are things I'm not going to, again, because of time, I'm not going to overstate what you already said. So let's hear some downside traits of David Bell.
Yeah, while athletic testing numbers are far from the end-all and be-all of player evaluation, his combine numbers were alarming. His triangle numbers, which is the 40, the vertical, and the broad, reflect the kind of player he is. He's not particularly explosive. He lacks suddenness, and he has below average speed. That combination could lead to NFL corners to sit on his short and intermediate routes if he fails to prove he can't get behind them once or twice a game. Didn't create a lot of separation in college, which makes it very unlikely he's going to do so in the pros.
Yes, I don't think he's a refined route runner, and I'm going to give you context to those numbers. His size adjusted speed, 38th percentile. That's his best measurable. His explosiveness, 20th percentile, and his agility, 8th percentile. I think he's facing an uphill battle. I think people are going to see the college production and like him more than he is. I think there's heavy bust potential here. Final words?
I'm going to slightly disagree with that last sentiment. I do like him as a prospect. Again, fit. He's going to need to be used correctly, I believe. Part of the reason, a quick look at some historical numbers, combine numbers, reveals that Gabriel Davis, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Jarvis Landry all fared pretty poorly in the same areas, in the same tests that David Bell did. Only Juju was remotely close to what Bell did in terms of college production. Ultimately, I choose to believe he's a better athlete than he tested. There's just too much nuance to his game to believe he's going to fail after being so dominant in college. And I understand comparisons, and what I've heard comparisons to Anquan Bolden and Michael Thomas. That might be a bit too high in the sky for him, but I do believe there is low end number one receiver potential with him.
All right, so we'll have to see how that one goes. We'll definitely circle back on that one after a little bit of time, maybe a couple of years, see how we're looking on that. And it's funny when Anquan Bolden's name come up, man, it's him and Steve Smith. I hate when people comp those guys just because the nasty streak those guys both had was just amazing. Let's get through one more receiver and one tight end, and we'll call it a day. Chris Olavey. So Chris Olavey from Ohio State, 6 foot, 187. Doug, what are some upside traits you see from Chris Olavey?
Plenty fast, high-level route runner, understands how to tempo his routes and sell his routes. While Ohio State their scheme does allow receivers to operate in space probably better than most. There's plenty of evidence that he can create his own breaks. When I talk about scheme throws, only 19 of his 65 catches from last year were on screens or deep throws. So he does work the short and intermediate areas quite a bit. The next thing to me that jumps out about his 2021 film is his body control and awareness along the sideline. Yes. Most receivers who excel in those two areas also tend to have very good hands, and that's the case here. He had a drop rate of 4.9%. That'll work. And well, he's not going to create much after contact, but he is a handful after the catch if he has some space to work with.
Yeah, I love him at the catch point. He can pluck the ball very well. I think that's a great trait to have for what he does. And when he gets an angle, his speed can get him big yards. He's very good at navigating an angle to beat some pursuit. So I think that'll be a strength for him. And he does get quickly into his routes to gain some separation. So I'm excited about that. And a great catch radius. I do like his catch radius. Threat at all levels of the field, kind of as you're intimating, Doug. He's just not a one-trick pony. And I think that's a great thing for him to have. What's some downside traits that you see for Chris Olavey?
Go ahead and pick up your drink and take another shot here. Lack of strength. One area where this shows up repeatedly is with the ball in his hands. While he's great at getting open, he only forced 2 missed tackles last year and 10 throughout his 4-year college career. That's unbelievably unbelievably low. At least early in his pro career, it would seem that he would be the rare prospect who has exceptional speed, but has to settle for being more of a possession receiver. And while his adding more lower body strength would help. Now, I'll skip that. I had that highlighted, but no. I say in a league that seems to be focusing more on receivers' ability to win in contested catch situations, he has stunningly little film when he's asked to win at a high point in the ball. He did on the rare occasion he was asked to, but I saw very little film of that. Is this a product of a somewhat average vertical jump? 32 inches for a receiver is not particularly good anymore, especially for a receiver of his size.
Now, a few things I mentioned that I agree with you on. He does struggle some against the press. He can get freed up at the college level, but I'm concerned if he struggled a little bit at the college level, the pro level is going to be worse for him. I did see physical corners knocking him off his route, and that's problematic. And at the top of his route, where a lot of the better receivers will get some separation there, I don't see that from him there. Not getting enough separation there. And then if he slows down a cut, he doesn't get back to speed right away. So I noticed there's a transition issue there. You agreeing with that, aren't you, Doug?
I am.
Yes. So, and I also, 2 last things. Catches with his body a little too often. And really, he's more of a catch and fall guy. We said sometimes he'll navigate a crease and go, but he's not a big yards after the catch guy.
No, not at all.
Final word, Chris Olavey.
No screaming weakness in his game outside of maybe his run after catch ability. Well, maybe outside of his run after catch ability, which could be something he improves on when he makes football his full-time job, but I don't think he's ever going to be exceptional in that area. On the other hand, it's hard to say any part of his game is truly elite, although his route running and body control on the sideline are very good. I believe he's a high 4 prospect with potential of something approaching Calvin Ridley. I don't think he's high end. That's pie in the sky. I think he's another one of these guys. It's going to need to begin his career as a Z or as a slot. I think he's going to be more useful in between the 20s than he is in the end zone.
Yes. A good, solid receiver for the next 7-8 years. A good, solid receiver. I don't think he's a superstar. I don't think he's going to be on the bench. I think he's going to be a solid NFL player for a good period of time. Sounds like you're somewhat on the same page with that?
Yes.
Okay, and then let's get to one tight end here. We'll go a little over the hour. And the main tight end that people have at the top of their boards is Trey McBride out of Colorado State, 6'4", 246. Doug, what are some positives you see out of Trey McBride?
Only 6 drops and 1 fumble during his college career. That's across 164 catches. He's as sure as hand as they come. I think he runs to his time speed, which is 4.56, which is excellent for a tight end. And he figures to threaten the seam from the moment he steps on the field. I see a lot of competitive spirit. And I like the effort that he puts into his blocking. He's not elite in either area, but he's certainly more advanced than most tight ends coming out in the draft recently. He was the first tight end since 2013 to surpass 1,100 yards in a season. He did that. Jason Morrow. I believe Jason Morrow was the guy that. Yes, he did that despite below-average quarterback play and emerging as the central focus of the defense every week. And he was quite versatile, contributing on special teams every year, and he made a few snaps even at fullback as well.
Yeah, I like how he also lines up successfully in the slot and out wide. He's versatile. You can move him around as a chess piece. I think that's very useful. Enough quickness. He has enough technique to get into his route effectively. I like that. He's also shows some flexibility and the ability to position his body to avoid some of those chip blocks. So he's very, very smart with that. And I also like at the top of his routes, he is able to get some separation. So I do think very favorably of Trey McBride. What are some downside traits?
Yeah. I don't see many holes in his game, but rather areas that he can shore up over the next year or two. The amount of separation that he gets for someone with his athleticism is disappointing, a bit disappointing, although it might be a function of concentrating too much on running the route as it's drawn up and the expectation that this defender will get help over the top. You saw a number of times where he just saw that safety come over the top, and he's thinking, okay, here we go again. I didn't see his eyes, but I could almost see what he was thinking. He's going to win more than his fair share of contested catches, but he could afford to be more aggressive in those situations. He only forced 5 missed tackles, which is kind of on the low end for a guy that caught 90 balls.
Yes.
And he committed 8 penalties last year. Obviously quite a bit on the high end. He blocks well for a college tight end, but probably needs to add more muscle.
You mentioned those penalties. If the Raiders didn't have Darren Waller, they'd be drafting him. They love those penalties by their players. A couple of downsides I see. When he's in line, the blocking tight end, he doesn't look like a good route runner from that position. When he's detached, he's great, but he seems uncomfortable when he's running routes from the natural inline position. And I do see him in the middle of the field get knocked off of more routes than I'd like to see. Again, could get that cleaned up. He does good at avoiding chips, but that was better when he was more detached from the formation. They're little nitpicky things, but I do see those. What's your final word on Trey McBride?
In my opinion, McBride is about as complete of a prospect as NFL coaches could hope for. That is not truly elite. I saw some of his stuff and thought Travis Kelce, not saying that he's Travis Kelce. I saw some Travis Kelce to his game. And there is that he has a chance in time to maybe approach one of the better tight ends in the league. Although I think a more realistic goal was my high end comp of Greg Olsen or somewhere in the Zach Ertz continuum. And so long as he stays healthy enough to run as well as he does now and develop more nuance as a route runner, I think he could quickly emerge as a top 10 tight end.
Yeah, and not to steal your comps, but really, when you said Greg Olsen and Zach Ertz, that is kind of what I see from him. And probably even more Zach Ertz, because really the way he's utilized best mirrors what Ertz was doing well. And so I could see that coming and having a nice, solid career. Ertz never had the numbers we wanted him to have, but he's been a very, very outstanding tight end. Maybe he did have those numbers. He had a couple great years. I thought he'd be like the legend, but he's been great. And I think we could see that out of Trey McBride as well. So, yeah, like you said, outstanding prospect. Well, that does it for our pre-draft analysis. First of all, make sure you're following Doug at Doug Orth. Find his work at FF Today. Where else can we find your work, Doug?
That's where you find it.
Perfect. And remember, tomorrow, depending when you're watching this, Thursday is draft night. 2 hours before the draft on this YouTube, Twitter channel, wherever one you're on, RotoWire we'll go over some prop bets before, and I'll be streaming during the draft on the RotoWire Instagram page. If you're bored, got nothing better to do, we'll talk some picks there. Otherwise, like I said, follow Doug. Thanks for your time. It's the most valuable thing you have. You spend it with us. Means the world to us. Enjoy the draft, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much, guys.